live. And thanks for joining the podcast. There has been multiple announcements in terms of how consulting arms have been doing extremely well in this AI period, right from PwC, KPMG to IBM. So I'm sure you're in the heat of what's happening. So very excited to sort of have you in the podcast episode. Thanks for taking the time to do it.
Thanks for having me here. And, I agree. I often tell my family and friends, this is my favorite job I've ever had. I actually started my career as a consultant and have spent the last 10 years in marketing. And so now, leading marketing for a consultancy, it feels like coming home for me. And as you said, it's a really exciting time for the consulting industry, but we also know one of the most popular use cases that every enterprise is trying to adopt is generative AI for marketing. Right. So I feel like I'm wearing two hats, as I help drive engagements for consulting, but I, also try and think through how do we actually embrace generative AI ourselves to change the market.
That's fantastic. I would love to start off the discussion with how does IBM think about its AI approach? I know that you had like 5 pillars you spoke about when you're doing a prep call. I think it would be good to talk about that to start with. Yeah.
Absolutely. So, I think IBM is in a really unique position to help our clients embrace generative AI. I mean, obviously, it's not new for IBM. We had, Watson participating on Jeopardy and winning back in about 12 years ago now. But we did, relaunch Watson X, which is our data and AI platform, just over a year ago now. But unlike, some of the other AI players who are out in the market, who are also partners of ours, we're also the only global technology company that has an in-house consultancy. So it puts us in a really unique position as we work with clients, and we've engaged with thousands of clients at this point to help them think through, how to first pilot and experiment with generative AI, and then to think through, how do you scale generative AI. And we're also blessed with a very strong primary research arm called the Institute for Business Value. So, we often publish anywhere from 80 to 100 studies in a year. It's primary research plus, a combination of subject matter expertise, laying out our point of view of what's happening in the market. And so for the last year, we've been regularly polling CEOs and really members from across the C-suite around how are they embracing generative AI, what's holding them back, what is they see as barriers. And this might, surprise you to hear from a technology company, but it's not the technology that's the barrier. More often than not, and our recent study with CEOs suggested that almost 70% feel success is actually going to hinge on the people adopting the technology. And when you take a step back and think about it, it's because generative AI, at its core, is going to change the way we as knowledge workers engage and work. It's going to transform the way we think about doing our tasks each and every day. And so we've been talking to our clients around, scaling. First of all, you have to start with the value and the business value, and you have to think iteratively. But we talk about sort of 5 key areas that you need to focus on for any transformation. The first is the strategy. You have to define a clear AI strategy. You have to pick the right use case, and you have to understand the business value you're going after, and you have to track and measure against that. And that's very often why you see so many clients out there starting with pilots. Right? You want to experiment first. You want to see, is the value really where I thought it was going to be? And then is it worthwhile? Is it worth my time and investment to actually scale that into production? The second is a notion of what we call an AI control center. And at IBM, we fundamentally believe the world is hybrid. There's not going to be one technology provider, one AI model provider, one cloud provider, one provider of assistance who's going to help an entire company in their work, right? Even if you take, marketing as a use case, we work regularly with Adobe Firefly for image creation. We use Watson X, for our own text creation. We're building assistants with Watson X, but also Copilot. And so we fundamentally believe, as an organization, you need to think about a platform or control center layer where your users can actually go in and access right? The tools, the technology, play around with it, prompt, and drive the innovation in a bottoms up way, but in an enterprise safe
Right.
up way. And that's how, we're starting to see new and innovative use cases come out that we can embrace. And those are the ones that we want to productize.
Right.
Scale. And I think, that's also how you drive the adoption from the people, right? If they can play with the tools, they can see and, start to see in real time the role it plays for them in their tasks each and every day. That's how you start to build excitement. The third is the data. Right? And, when you think about so much of what we've all been doing and how we're using generative AI in our personal lives, with ChatGPT, that is all of the publicly available data out in the world. And it's incredible, right? There's a lot of that, but there's some stats that have come out that say that that's about 2% of the data that actually exists. And most of the data, right, that's like the tip of the iceberg. Most of the data is actually underneath. It's sitting in your enterprises and all of the systems that we use. And sometimes it's sitting, individually on individuals' laptops. But that's what's going to drive competitive advantage for any company. It's when you can start to train the model on the data so that it's actually supercharging, your own work, your own positioning, your own brand, and getting it out there. And that's very often the most challenging part, right, of any of the implementations. It's how do you actually access the data? How do you ready the data so that you can use it and you can build that competitive advantage, for yourselves? The fourth is you have to treat it like a transformation, right? Because the reality is what often happens in companies, and we see it ourselves, is if you don't treat this like a transformation, you have 1,000 initiatives and flowers that are blooming, but you're not actually methodically understanding how do I actually change the process, right? How do I take advantage of the fact that this can, truly transform the way we think and the way we work? But to do that, you have to, start to set out those parameters, and you need to drive consistency, and you need to do this at scale, and you need to make some commitments, around the business benefits that you're going to achieve. You need to have a long-term vision and goal in terms of what are you going to do with those benefits. There's a famous quote from Henry Ford, which was, if we had asked our customers what they wanted, they would have said they wanted a faster horse. But it actually took sort of thinking about the transformation and the role that technology could play to think about building a car. And that's what we believe we can do if you fundamentally take a step back and say this is a new era. We can rethink the way our operating models, right, and how we get work done. And then the last piece is the people, right? And I shouldn't have even put that as fifth. I should have put that as first, because again, it really is about all of us as humans, both consumers, but business workers and professionals. It's about us embracing a new way of working and embracing the tools and the technology. And that piece, I think, is such a challenge, for every company. And you have to think about how do you personalize and tailor that change management experience for the different type of people that you have within your organization.
That's great, Karen. I think I love the 5-step framework. And while you were articulating that, I just realized that I forgot about IBM Deep Blue long time back when it beat Kasparov and all those folks at chess. And while it might not be pure generative AI, I think you guys were ahead of the curve back then. So it's a good framework to have. One sort of question I'm sure the audience would be interested in is, what use cases are you seeing for marketing, especially? Right, I think there's a lot of excitement around content creation, content generation. Right, would love for you to expand on some early use cases you're seeing, you're trying out in your own team. Would be good to hear that.
Absolutely. So first of all, I think you set this up well, that this is using AI, and using AI and automation is not new, especially in the marketing space. We've been doing this for quite some time, as have many others in the industry, and even things like translation using automation and machine learning technologies. is just fantastic for cost savings and speed. And, I think for us, as we looked at early use cases for generative AI, we wanted to tackle the areas that we knew were driving a lot of handoffs, a lot of inefficiencies in our content supply chain, and a lot of costs that were not, adding significant value for us. And so content creation, was just sort of natural place for us to look. And what we did, our head of brand actually said, all right, if we're going to focus on content creation, let's kind of frame the type of content that we want to think about and how we want to get started. And he likes to use a pyramid approach. And, I think of it as the base of the pyramid is, high volume, highly competitive content, lots of derivative assets. Think of that as, social, email, blogs. And that's the type of content that really anybody should be able to produce, but very often we've got bottlenecks in the system because either a centralized team is producing it or your product marketers, want to do it, but they still have to get that through to legal and maybe a centralized content team to do copywriting and editing, and then back to legal, right, to proof it, and then maybe back to a digital team who's thinking about, how do they publish it. And at the end of the day, when you take a step back and look, it becomes this very inefficient process and approach that can take like up to 6 weeks to produce things that should be able to produce in minutes, like media banners, right? Blogs, again, email, social. And then you think about, wanting to actually personalize or tailor that content. And you almost never get to that step because it's so onerous to produce all the content that you want to produce just for the one campaign. And then as you go up the pyramid, you get to the more, highly customized, more integrated content that you're spending more time on. It's more valuable. There's less of it, right? But it's much more meaningful because you're making a splash, right? And you're driving reach in the market. And I think of that as like your integrated campaigns, right? So we decided as a company to tackle the base of the pyramid.
Yeah.
It was an area that we knew could drive some quick hits. Again, we knew it's where a big portion of our cost and inefficiencies and waste was sitting. And we also knew it was an area that we could just really drive some excitement and motivation with our marketing organization because, right, of the pain in doing this.
Yeah.
So we actually started with a pilot with Adobe Firefly. It was April of 2023. So 3 weeks after Adobe Summit, they had just launched Adobe Firefly. They announced that it was, going to be out there in beta, and we were really excited. We're a very large customer, but also a large partner with Adobe. And we had the Masters golf tournament coming up, 3 weeks later. And we've been a partner with the Masters for 30 years. We actually power their digital app and experience. And we were launching a generative AI experience for the first time. So there was going to be, the opportunity to do spoken voice commentary in generative AI as you watched your favorite players on any hole, right? Because when you think about any, sporting event, there's the broadcasters who are, showcasing the holes that they're showing, right, on national TV. Through the digital app, you could watch any of your players on any hole, but you don't necessarily have that broadcast commentary. And so using spoken generative AI, enables us to enrich that experience for any of the 11 million viewers who are watching through the app. So really exciting capability. I think one of the earliest capabilities that any, technology company brought to market at scale. And so, that is one of our major marketing campaigns that we always, wrap around that Masters experience as well. So everything from television, right, to media, to social, to website experiences, emails, et cetera. It's a fully integrated campaign. And the name of the campaign was What If? What if you could remaster the Masters? Right. And it was intended to be a provocation for anybody watching to say, okay, if you can have this type of experience with the Masters, what could it mean for my business?
Right.
I apply generative AI, as well. And so we used Adobe Firefly. we had a very simple question mark that was part of the campaign, right, to signify what if. And so we prompted Firefly. We wanted to create a multiplier of digital assets and derivative content around that. We did. We produced about 200 different assets, about 1,000 derivative versions of that, so that we could personalize and tailor this across media and social and on the web. And we put it into market. And what was really interesting for us is we knew it was going to deliver cost savings. And it did. We were able to produce the content in about a fifth of the time of what it had historically taken. But we were also able to produce about 10x the content, right?
Got it.
So the throughput was there, right? So suddenly you realize you can, deliver on the promise of personalization, right? We've always wanted to do, but we've never really been able to get to. But we also found the social tile performed 26 times better than our average benchmark. And when you take a step back and think about it, it makes sense. We personalized the content so it was more relevant, right, to the audience who was experiencing it, and we gave the marketers time back, because rather than spending all of this time on lower value production, they were able to spend more of their time on the tagline, right, and the creative around it, and ensuring it was an integrated experience that matched and delivered on the promise when the audience actually came to IBM.com. And so that was enough for us to say, this is fantastic. We want to keep going. And we have been scaling out a capability using Watson X and Adobe Firefly so that we can tackle that derivative content across our portfolio of offerings and campaigns that we run. But we're also now experimenting as well in the top of the pyramid, right? So those highly customized integrated campaigns that we do with our agency, we're using things like Firefly to speed up the ideation process, right? So it used to take.
That's great.
Yeah, it's amazing when you think about what we would do. It might be you come up with a concept right after your brief, you pass it over to your agency. Your agency takes 2 weeks to come back with visuals for you to choose from, and then you move into production, and now you can speed up that time from what used to take 2 to 3 weeks down to 2 days. And again, you give yourself the time back to focus on the creativity.
When you are articulating that, at least it's very clear to me that agencies in general have to reinvent how they think about working with clients. Like, I think the traditional approach is not going to work, because internal teams are getting so efficient, so they'll have to figure out how else to add value, where else to add value, etc. So it's a great point you mentioned. One thing that you sort of brought out on the spoken voice commentaries are just fantastic. At least I'm hearing a lot of excitement around video in general as well, because video is multimodal. You can have text, audio, video, right? But it's still early in terms of how marketers are leveraging that. Are you seeing any excitement around that? And any use cases emerging early on, Karen?
Yeah, so we are. And, I think for us, I should say, we're very concerned about brand safety, and all of the research that we do with, heads of marketing, heads of design, and other business leaders, suggests it's actually the number one concern for anyone in terms of embracing generative AI for marketing. And, so we actually, we're leaning into this notion of trust what you create. And we're not actually right now putting any content that we produce automatically for the customer. We always have what I call positive friction. We have the human, who's intervening, right, at every stage to review and use what we're generating with AI as inspiration, right, to speed up and then take it to the next level.
I like the term positive friction, by the way. I think it's a very good term to have humans introduce some friction to the process to get the bar up a little bit. That's great.
Exactly. And so video, I think has probably been a little more concerning, just given, the nature of, what video looks like. But I think there are a lot of companies, and when I talk to my peers, they're using it for internal enablement, which I think is a great use case. I saw some really exciting capabilities that are going to be coming from some of the tech providers out there, where you can do translation, and the lips will move, and you're not really going to be able to tell. And I think that is game changing.
Right. Right.
When you think about just the cost and the barrier that's been in place when you produce even an Anthem asset, especially in video, to actually translate that into however many countries you want to, and make sure it's customized and localized to the needs, right, of that market.
That's great, Karen. Also, interestingly, I saw that you were moderating a session at Cannes with a few content leaders, right, and Adobe as well. I'm curious to understand, like, some takeaways that came from the session in general, but also what was the overall sentiment when you spoke to other folks who are senior leaders? How are they looking at use cases, tech products? What is happening in the world? Like, just want to hear your thoughts on that event and what was
absolutely. It was interesting. It was only my second time in Cannes.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
I had been there 1 year prior, and obviously generative AI was all the rage. But a year ago, it was really interesting. It was very theoretical.
Right.
A lot of talk and ideas.
Sure.
How could generative AI be used? Where would it drive the most impact for a company? And there was a lot of fear. Right? There was just a lot of discussion around, is generative AI going to take away the role of creators? Is it going to take away jobs of marketers? And I think there is still some of that fear out there.
Yeah.
And I think that's natural anytime you have a disruptive technology, right, that comes in. But what I was pleasantly surprised about this year was it was much less theoretical. So lots of concrete use cases, very few companies that weren't already experimenting with generative AI. And I think many of my peers had real clarity in terms of how they're leveraging generative AI. I think many are thinking about it the way we are, which is this notion of, let's tackle the manual tasks and inefficiencies that we have in the marketing process first. Again, to generate some excitement, and then ideally you're freeing up what I think of as the most precious currency for all of us right now, which is time.
Right.
We're freeing up investment, capacity, time, so that we can actually start to personalize the experiences. So that I thought was very exciting. We had a really exciting announcement in Cannes as well, which I think will really segue us for the future, which is a partnership that we're doing with WPP and LinkedIn, and that's specific for B2B marketers. And there was a great quote that a gentleman from LinkedIn said as we were launching this, which is B2B marketers are like left-handed people who are living in a right-handed world, because so many, isn't that fun? So many of the tools that are out there today are really designed for B2C.
Right.
And what's happening in the B2B world, I'll tell you, technology in particular, is the number of influencers that are engaged in any B2B buying decision has gone up. You have 12 to 14 involved and engaged. The length of the buying cycle has increased. It's not linear, right? It's this sort of iterative cycle and journey. And even us, at IBM, we're starting to recognize we can't treat marketing the way we used to, which is sort of a volume-based SQL game. We need to drive more of an ABM targeted strategy, and we need to identify who are the right members of any buying cohort and buying group, and we have to try and find them. And it's been really tough. There are a number of tools and technologies out there today, but none of them are really holistic, integrated. And none of them really tap into the fact that the reality is, for us, it's a hybrid marketing mix, right? An approach. It's not just digital, but we do a ton of events, and we haven't really, been able to get our arms around how do you best reach and engage.
Right. Yeah.
And how do you start to personalize the message and the experience and the channels? Got it.
So the announcement, Karen, was more around how would you target a buying group through your partnership with LinkedIn and WPP. Is that how the tech would work?
It's an open platform that's going to help us throughout our workflow, starting with identifying and targeting and finding the buying group, and that's where LinkedIn comes in, because they're arguably the number one B2B platform out there in terms of aggregating B2B buyers and influencers. So identifying and targeting. laying out and planning for the optimal marketing mix, right? Based on who you know you're trying to reach, things like persona assistance. So you could talk to different personas, understand their wants, their needs, and start to generate the content that you need that's going to be most relevant for them. There's a CMO command center so that you can very rapidly, in a natural language, approach, start to ask questions about what are the patterns and the trends in terms of what's resonating most, which buyers am I resonating with, who am I not, who am I still not reaching, what happens, right? What if I change the mix a bit? What will I start to see? But we've never really had this holistic approach, right, to do all of this together and in an integrated way. And so that's why we are so incredibly excited by this partnership. And we are going to be client zero at IBM. So we're going to use this ourselves, within our own marketing organization, and IBM Consulting is the primary consulting provider who's going to do that.
Because I can see even startups leveraging a product like that, because the question is who's the champion, who's the budget holder, is that who's involved in the whole process, and it's usually tough to get that in the sales process. But if we can get it ahead, we can probably prepare ourselves a little bit more as we enter a deal. So sounds promising.
We hope so.
Awesome, Karen. One question I think about a lot is how should marketing teams think about sort of up-leveling their skill set or expanding their scope of work as AI has stepped in, right? For example, like there are very narrow swim lanes for many marketers. Like, hey, I'm gonna only focus on written content, only on video, right? And I think about a lot of, is there a way where we can sort of expand the skill set of marketing teams, and how will the functions evolve, etc. I don't know if you have any high-level thoughts, since you speak to a lot of people and what I've seen what is happening inside IBM as well.
It's a really interesting question. And I think it's a good one because the marketing profession has been so siloed, right? And I think that's what we're all trying to address and tackle is, you tend to get individual functions who are working discipline by discipline, but we know, you need an integrated journey, and you need to be able to reach and engage and think about the customer first and make sure you're putting coordinated messages, right, and experiences in front of them.
Yep.
I do think, as we're starting to connect the content supply chain, right, and the workflow across teams, it becomes a very natural opportunity to just motivate the teams to think audience first.
Yeah.
In everything that they do, and think about the handoffs and the pain points that they have, because I think most of the pain points are because of all of the handoffs.
Right. And also I think the point you mentioned about integrated, I think is key, because for example, let's say a webinar gets over and you have a video recording, right? Can the same person who has done the webinar create some short form video clips, create some content and give it to the content person who can review it? I think that particular job was never done, right? To your point, and it just makes the whole process more integrated, right? So that's what I'm sort of also hoping to see more of as this spreads.
I love that, and we've been talking about we run a lot of events and we do a lot of presentations and keynotes, and how do you just very rapidly take a keynote and turn it into a blog? Right. And take snippets, to your point, and turn that into something you can show on social or as part of a webinar. And right now, because it's different teams that own each of those pieces, it becomes incredibly onerous and time consuming. And generative AI can, you could take one piece of content and turn it into the multiple derivatives almost instantaneously. And so I do think encouraging each marketer to think about the role generative AI can play, and just challenge themselves to say, what are the pain points that I have, and what are the ideas that I want to bring forward in terms of what can be solved? Yeah. That's what I think we're looking for right now, is all the innovative use cases, and then you prioritize, right, and you productize the best of. I have a saying I love. I think a lot of people say this now, but generative AI will not replace, us as humans, but those of us who use generative AI who will replace those We do not. And I do think, it's moving so quickly that, tomorrow's leaders are the ones who are going to embrace it today.
Yep. Yep.
So we have some, tips and tricks that we've been doing that I think is generating excitement within IBM. And again, we have the benefit of, being a technology company and having our own generative AI tools and technologies, which helps us move quickly. But we actually kicked off today our second IBM-wide hackathon.
Oh.
So it's called the Watson X Challenge. We had 158,000 participants, I think, last year or last July when we did this with 28,000 teams. And this year we're doing something very similar. And so we're incredibly excited to see the ideas that come out.
Is it mostly developers coming together and okay.
No, it's amazing. It's, everyone from IBM. And so, our marketing organization, our HR, finance, our procurement organization. And what's great is, we're all trying to tackle using the tools. What are the challenges that I have? And how can I apply AI to my work so that I can drive real change? I mean, because that's the promise of AI. And what we have done at IBM, actually through our consulting organization, is we've created, remember I told you about that AI control center?
Yeah.
We've created our own AI platform. It's called IBM Consulting Advantage. And with that, you can build and access assistants that are designed to help you, regardless of what role you're in. You can upload your own data. You can chat with that data in an enterprise safe way. You can integrate this, into your daily functions. And this is how we're actually engaging and transforming the way we consult with all of our clients. But it gives us the added benefit of, enabling everyone at IBM to actually access and use this to drive their own innovation as well.
And this hackathon, Karen, you mentioned, can marketing teams come in and present some tools they have found outside and see how they have changed their lives? Or is it primarily like, hey, these are some ideas that we have brought to the table. What can we do about it? Like, how does it, because I'm curious to know the structure of this. It's very interesting though.
So right now, we use our own Watson X technology because, we're looking for the use cases of how,
to leverage Watson X.
Yes. And so, marketers can obviously use other tools that, as I said earlier, this is a hybrid world. There's no one tool that's going to solve all of our needs, but it very much is, designed so that all of us across IBM understand the role and honestly the limitless potential
100%.
that exists using generative AI.
I was talking to one of our customers, Box, right? And they had an interesting setup where they had a Shark Tank style presentation where marketing teams present ideas, how they can sort of improve their workflows, productivity, tools they have found. And that seems like a very interesting and great approach to sort of talk about AI as a team, especially in marketing, right? In terms of having the root use cases come through the end users come and present to the leadership team, which is like I highly recommend that, which seems like working well for you guys as well. That's great. Again, one sort of last question before I move to the last question. Since there is so much noise about every products trying to add AI into their whole product portfolio, I'm curious to hear your thoughts on how can product marketers help distinguish their product launches and stuff, right? Because, I see some common sort of jokes on LinkedIn that somebody's adding another AI tool to their product, right? And it makes the life of a product marketer so difficult to stand out. And I'm just curious to know your thoughts on what could product marketers do better.
It's a great question, and I had to laugh because when I was in Cannes, actually the best session I went to was TED, and it was one of their strategic coaches who started the session. It was all about how do you communicate. Going forward and going a little bit back to basics around listen to your audience and understand, their needs. But she actually started with the premise that we're living in a sea of sameness. And it's actually, we have the risk of it only getting worse with generative AI. And so she used an example of the phrase, innovation is in our DNA. And she showed like 10 or 20 different brands that are using that phrase, using it either in earnings announcements, or earnings reports or annual reports or on their website or in a press release. And she just kept showing brand after brand. And then she went to ChatGPT and she prompted, how should I talk about my company being innovative? And, a nice long paragraph came out. And at the end, it said, you should describe yourself as having innovation in your DNA.
Oh my God.
So it was a really good reminder, right? That if we all use generative AI too much and don't actually combine it with our own creativity and use it, quite frankly, to take the time back to be more creative and use that just as your starting point,
Right.
and then go where you need to next, we're going to continue to see a sea of sameness. And you're right, it's a really crowded market right now.
Yeah.
So what I'm trying to do is we're actually taking a step back right now and thinking about how do we actually reposition our own brand in this era of AI, and how do we stand out from the pack. And I think for all of us, again, it does go back to time and time again, when you look at what comes back from clients around why did they go with a certain company for a no regret move, it tends to be they listen to my needs and I can trust them.
That's
right.
it.
And then the other attributes, cost, easy to work with, et cetera, those are like behind. So how can we actually use generative AI so that we can get closer to the client, right? Or spend our own time being closer to the client, listening to the needs, and starting to think really differently and break through around how do you actually stand out from the pack.
That's awesome. That's a great answer. Then one last question before we end. I usually ask this question to everyone. What would your advice be to someone who is watching the episode, probably in the middle management, right, and maybe even women who aspire to sort of get to a marketing leadership role down the line, right? If you want to reflect on your career and sort of learnings you've had over the years in terms of what made you where you are, would love to hear that.
Absolutely. I've probably had a different journey than many others. I spent the first half of my career as a strategy consultant, and now the second half in marketing. I actually think the two go hand in hand. The role of senior marketers, I think you can shape it to be what you want. And there are, some marketers who have a growth mindset and, say, I want to, support the business and the business strategy and, make sure marketing is used as an engine to drive growth. And that's my philosophy and belief. There are others, who take a different approach. But as I reflect on what I've enjoyed in my career and what I think, makes for good marketing, I think you need to take risks, and that means try, different careers, try different roles. Don't, grow too comfortable in one position. Doesn't mean you have to switch companies. I've actually spent most of my career here at IBM, but you do have to try different roles and shape that role to be what you think it should be. That's number one. Number two, I think you have to be data driven. And you have to be, I always use the term curiosity. I have like a 4 C's framework that I talk to my team about. But data-driven marketing, and data-driven storytelling, we have always said is, very important. It's, that's not new. We've been doing this for 10 years, but in the world of generative AI, I think it becomes even more important. I think you need to embrace technology.
Right.
And I think you have to be at the forefront to challenge the status quo and really push the thinking, because, I feel like marketing organizations were bursting at the seams, and some centralize, some decentralize, sometimes you outsource functions and roles, sometimes you bring them in-house, but we haven't really changed the processes of marketing. And I actually think marketing, unlike, some of the other enterprise functions like supply chain or finance or procurement, is often less structured. And in a world where you're trying to do more with less, you're trying to get to the personalization, I do think you need an operating model that fits, right, where we're going in the future. And I think it actually is like marketers who are sort of earlier and midway through their career who can challenge the way we're structured and the way we operate to say, this doesn't work for me. I can't wait 6 weeks to get a blog out. So how can I do this differently? And that's what I think is, as a, someone who's earlier in their career, like hold your hand up, raise your hand and take that risk and, start to lay out and just be part of where is this going in the future.
That's great. Karen, this has been fantastic. I think I've personally written out a bunch of takeaways that I'm going to share with my team. So hopefully folks who also listen to the episode do that as well. But thanks for being so transparent. I know you only share so much being at a large corporate as public, but thanks for being so transparent. It's been a very, very enriching discussion. Thank you so much.
Well, it's been a pleasure to be here with you. Thanks for having me.